There is a moment in every great city's life when you stop seeing what it is and start seeing what it used to be. The grandeur remains, an immutable architecture of marble and ancient stone, but beneath the perfect facade, you notice something is quietly rotting. Rome is having that moment right now. For 2,000 years, this was the undisputed center of the world, metaphorically and literally. The monuments built here, the Colosseum, the Pantheon, the Forum, were of such staggering scale that medieval Europeans believed they were the work of giants. They didn't think humans were capable of such engineering. Today, Rome welcomes more than 30 million visitors a year. If you only read the headlines or scroll through the glossy marketing, you'd believe the Eternal City has never been stronger. But this is the lie we are sold. The story mainstream media refuses to investigate. If you spend more than a week here, away from the postcard views, and talk to the people who were born here, a different reality emerges. One of slow erosion and quiet systemic collapse. We are witnessing a great city hollow itself out, transforming from a living entity into a museum of its own past. This is the story of how Rome fell once and how it is falling again. But this time, it is not invading barbarians. It is something quieter, internalized, and far harder to fight. We are Empire Falls, and we document the decline that the rest of the world prefers to ignore. If you have ever felt that a historically significant place has become a stage set rather than a home, subscribe. We show you the collapse in real time, before everyone else catches on. Let us begin where Rome always begins, with the myth. At its peak, the Roman Empire was a miracle of engineering and logistics. In the 2nd century AD, the city's population was between 1 and 2 million people, by far the largest on Earth. This was a metropolis of functional running water, sophisticated underfloor heating, public libraries, and a postal system. Its infrastructure was so enduring that some of its original roads, aqueducts, and bridges are still in use 2,000 years later. But here is the first critical pattern, the structural warning sign that every empire ignores because it is only visible in retrospect. Rome's greatest achievements were also its earliest vulnerability. The infrastructure required to sustain this civilization was so complex and interdependent that the moment the system strained, the decline was catastrophic. The aqueducts needed constant engineering. The essential grain supply required control of Egypt and North Africa. The vast road network demanded a massive, professional army. Rome was not just a city, it was a complex machine, and machinery of that complexity does not age gracefully. The Western Empire officially fell in 476 AD, but the decline didn't begin there. Historians trace it back 2 or 3 centuries earlier, to the gradual debasement of the currency, the contraction of tax revenues, the plague years that emptied the countryside, the political paralysis where 20 emperors rose and fell in just 50 years. The fall of Rome was not a dramatic collapse. It was a slow, incremental erosion until the final emperor was deposed in a city that no longer controlled anything. That pattern is modernizing. Today, Rome governs 2.8 million people and is the capital of Italy, the 4th largest economy in the Eurozone. And yet, by almost every modern metric that defines a functional city, it is failing its own residents in ways that would have been unimaginable 50 years ago. The infrastructure of modern Rome is crumbling. Unlike the engineering marvels built by the ancient Romans, the metro system, one of the smallest of any major European capital relative to the city's size, is an operational crisis plagued by flooding, cancellations, and constant delays. This system is trapped between a financial crisis and an archaeological problem. Every attempt to dig for new tunnels stops the moment workers inevitably hit an ancient necropolis, a mosaic floor, or an intact section of an aqueduct. Construction work is paralyzed for months or years. This is a city built literally on top of itself, and the institutional weight of that history makes building modern infrastructure almost impossible. Above ground, the situation is even more tangible. The famous cobblestone streets are treacherous, structurally inadequate for the volume of heavy tourist buses that now traverse them, making them dangerous for cars and impossible for cyclists. Garbage collection is a recurring civic emergency. Years of debt, mismanagement, and labor disputes have left the municipal waste management company mired in crisis. Photographs of trash piled high near the Colosseum or the Trevi Fountain viral internationally. Not on the periphery, but in the very center. Rome actually ships significant amounts of its own waste to other regions and abroad because it lacks the capacity to process its own output. A former urban planner who worked with the Rome municipality revealed the institutional reality in 2022. The fundamental problem is not a lack of political will, but deep institutional inertia. He described a bureaucracy where every decision requires approvals from 6 different departments with overlapping jurisdiction, and none have the staff to process requests in a reasonable time frame. It is a system built to prevent progress, and it is as eternal as the Pantheon. This is what the 30 million tourists do not see. They see the golden hour light on the Forum, the gelato, the priests in cassocks moving through piazze that look exactly as they did in photographs from a century ago. The marketing of Rome is flawless, and it should be. Selling this myth is what Rome has done for 2,000 years, since Augustus commissioned Virgil to write the Aeneid. But the critical question is whether this marketing can sustain a city when the fundamental infrastructure beneath it is collapsing. And this is where our investigation must reveal something darker. Rome's relationship with tourism has now crossed a threshold from which there is no escape without painful structural change. The city has not managed the influx, it has surrendered to it. Airbnb listings in the historic center have exploded since 2015, giving Rome one of the highest concentrations of short-term rentals of any European capital. The consequence is one felt from Venice to Barcelona, the slow but total evacuation of actual inhabitants from the city center. When a landlord can make more in 3 weeks from tourists than in 3 months from a long-term local tenant, the economic logic wins. The residents are pushed out, and in their place come gelato stands, selfie spots, and souvenir shops selling plastic colosseums manufactured in China. The historic neighborhood of Trastevere, once a specific working-class Roman quarter, has been entirely colonized by this theme park economy. Long-term residents described the change with deep exhaustion. It's not Trastevere anymore, one shopkeeper's daughter told a documentary crew. It's a stage set that used to be a neighborhood. The same process is consuming the Prati district near the Vatican, and even the very center, where the actual residential population declines every single year. What is being built in Rome right now is not a city. It is a hospitality complex built around ancient ruins. This historical parallel is impossible to ignore. Rome went through this before, not in antiquity, but in the 16th and 17th centuries, when the papal court deliberately turned the city into a monumental pilgrimage destination, sacrificing functional urban infrastructure for spectacular architecture to impress visitors. The population stagnated, and the economy withered outside the church economy. Rome became a spectacular stage set sustained by the revenue of those passing through, not those living within. It recovered from that centuries ago. The question we must diagnose now is whether the institutional capacity or the political will exists for another recovery. Based on the data we are observing, the answer is complex at best. The economic machine that once anchored a nation is now producing something else entirely, a structural dependency that hollows out the city from within. When a city's primary industry shifts from creating wealth to liquidating its own historical identity, the decline ceases to be an unfortunate side effect. It becomes the business model. The numbers behind this transition are not hidden. They are sitting in national registry offices and municipal tax records, tracing a shift that is mathematically absolute. Consider the real estate data. Between 2015 and the mid-2020s, the concentration of short-term tourist rentals in Rome's historic center grew by over 160%. In specific pockets of the Centro Storico, short-term listings now account for nearly 1 in 4 available housing units. For a local family looking for a place to live, this means the average cost of a long-term lease has risen by 42% in less than a decade, effectively pricing out the very people who clean the streets, teach the children, and keep the hospitals running. This real estate distortion has triggered a corresponding collapse in the local commercial ecosystem. According to retail data tracking the city's central districts, traditional businesses, bakeries, hardware stores, cobblers, and neighborhood markets have seen a 35% vacancy or conversion rate over the last 8 years. In their place, municipal registries show a near-identical surge in low-tier hospitality licenses. Every time a generational grocery store closes because the rent has doubled, a franchise selling imported souvenirs or mass-produced industrial pizza takes its lease. The concrete human consequence is an immediate breakdown of neighborly reliance. An elderly resident can no longer buy a loaf of bread or get a lamp fixed without taking a bus out of their own neighborhood. The demographic data shows where those residents are going. Rome is experiencing a profound demographic inversion. While the overall population of the metropolitan area remains superficially stable at 2.8 million, the population of the historic core has plummeted, with some neighborhoods losing up to 20% of their permanent residents in a generation. The city is aging faster than almost any other major capital in Europe, with the over 65 demographic now outnumbering the under 25 demographic by a ratio of nearly 2 to 1. For the city, this means a shrinking tax base paired with a soaring demand for social services and elderly care. For the neighborhoods, it means the quiet disappearance of children's voices from the public squares, replaced by the rolling wheels of tourist luggage on cobblestones. To understand how this looks on the ground, you have to look past the neon signs of the main thoroughfares and find the side streets where the real city is trying to survive. On a narrow alleyway just 3 blocks from the Campo de' Fiori sits a small, dimly lit workshop where an artisan named Sergio has spent 44 years repairing antique furniture. His hands are permanently stained with walnut stain, and his shop is a chaotic archive of detached chair legs, Baroque mirrors, and hand tools that belonged to his grandfather. For decades, his business relied on a network of local families who brought him their heirlooms. Today, almost all of those families are gone. Sergio's rent has increased 3 times since 2018, driven by the speculative value of the apartments above his workshop, which have all been retrofitted with keyless digital locks for tourist check-ins. His remaining neighbors are not people. They are transient guests who stay for 48 hours and have no use for a furniture restorer. The local butcher next door closed last winter, replaced by an automated vending machine vestibule that sells cheap umbrellas and external phone batteries. We were told by locals that Sergio now spends his afternoons sitting on a wooden stool outside his door, watching tour groups follow raised flags through an alleyway where he used to know every face. He expects to close the doors permanently before the end of the year, ending a century of family trade because a workshop cannot compete with the square meter yield of a luggage storage locker. This is the hidden mechanics of the tourist monoculture. It behaves exactly like an invasive crop, absorbing all the local capital, real estate, and political attention until the soil is too exhausted to grow anything else. The municipality becomes addicted to the immediate cash flow of hotel taxes and tourist spending, using it to plug short-term deficits while ignoring the long-term destruction of the city's human capital. It is an economic arrangement that works perfectly for the hospitality cartels and the international property funds, but it leaves the actual municipality structurally fragile, completely exposed to the next global disruption. And this process is not happening in a vacuum. The hollowing out of Rome is not a localized misfortune or a random piece of bad luck. It follows a precise economic pattern that is currently cannibalizing historic centers across the Western world. It is the exact same architectural and social transformation that turned Venice into an unlivable reservation, that triggered massive local protests in Barcelona, and that is currently pricing the working class out of Lisbon. The mechanism is identical. Global capital identifies a place of unique historical value, detaches it from its local population, and turns it into a high-yield financial asset. The tragedy of Rome is that its institutional paralysis makes it uniquely defenseless against this assault. In Milan, a diversified economy anchored by banking, tech, and manufacturing provides a structural counterweight to gentrification, keeping the city functional for professionals. But Rome has no counterweight. Having failed to build a modern private sector, it has allowed tourism to become its default employer, creating a low-wage, low-skill economy that forces its most ambitious young minds to pack their bags and leave. What we are looking at is a systemic failure of governance disguised as a successful tourism boom. The city is celebrating its record-breaking visitor numbers, while its social fabric is being systematically unraveled, piece by piece, block by block. The warning signs are clear, the data is undeniable, and the human cost is visible on every corner of the historic center. And this structural imbalance leads directly to the most critical vulnerability of all, the complete collapse of economic resilience. The ultimate stage of structural decline is not the physical ruin of a city, but the institutional denial that surrounds it. We are faced with a profound civics paradox. The erosion of Rome's urban functionality is completely obvious to anyone walking its streets, yet it remains entirely absent from official communiques. The louder the metrics of decay scream, the more frantic the celebratory rhetoric from municipal leadership becomes. This silence is not accidental, it is actively manufactured. Behind the scenes, a distinct chilling effect governs how city data is handled and interpreted. Independent researchers and regional economists point out that municipal agencies consistently spin critical indicators to maintain the illusion of an urban renaissance. When official reports note a surge in new commercial registrations in the central districts, they deliberately omit the qualitative reality. These are not sustainable, value-generating enterprises, but precarious, short-lived hospitality services. There is an atmosphere of quiet intimidation among public sector employees and independent urban preservationists, those who document the true state of municipal degradation, whether tracking the structural instability of the historic cobblestone roads under the weight of commercial transit, or mapping the systemic failure of the underground drainage network, face immediate bureaucratic pushback. We were told by researchers that funding for independent civic audits is routinely dried up if the findings contradict the triumphant narrative of a record-breaking tourist season. To speak publicly about the hollowing out of neighborhoods is framed by the hospitality lobby as an attack on the city's primary economic lifeline, transforming honest diagnostic analysis into an act of civic betrayal. When a society agrees to falsify its own reality, the consequences expand far beyond the municipal border. The hollowing out of Rome is not just a tragedy for the Romans. It represents a systemic crisis for the entire Italian state and the broader European model. Rome is the administrative anchor of a nation already grappling with profound stagnation, a crushing public debt that hovers around 135% of GDP, and one of the lowest birth rates in the developed world. When the capital city abandons the pretense of maintaining a functional, diversified economy and surrenders completely to a low-wage tourist monoculture, it ceases to function as an engine of national progress. The regional implications are mathematically severe. By allowing its historic center to become an exclusive playground for international wealth funds and short-term visitors, Rome is actively exporting its human capital. The steady drain of educated, multilingual young professionals, under 40 toward Milan, Northern Europe, or overseas, creates a permanent demographic deficit. The tax base that remains is disproportionately elderly, retired, or stuck in stagnant public sector roles, creating a structural imbalance where public expenditures permanently outpace internal revenue generation. If this trajectory continues, the capital will transform into a permanent financial drain on the state, requiring constant federal bailouts to maintain basic municipal operations. This is how an institution collapses from within while appearing completely stable on the surface. The system burns through its own foundational resources, its people, its civic fabric, its regulatory integrity, to keep the external facade polished for another season. The mainstream media continues to frame the explosion of international visitor numbers as a sign of global relevance, ignoring the reality that this influx is acting as a solvent, dissolving the very community that made the city worth visiting in the first place. This process forces us to confront a larger, more unsettling question about the trajectory of historic urban spaces in the 21st century. If a city that managed to survive the collapse of antiquity, the plagues of the Middle Ages, and the violence of foreign empires cannot withstand the peaceful, legal pressures of modern real estate speculation and global tourism, then what hope is there for the rest of our shared cultural heritage? We are left to wonder whether the preservation of history has become entirely incompatible with the demands of a living, forward-looking society. Is it possible for a metropolis to carry the psychological and physical weight of 2,000 years of greatness and still remain a functional home for its children? Or are we destined to watch our most significant historical centers transform into magnificent, melancholy stage sets visited by the entire world, but inhabited by no one who remembers what it truly felt like when the city was alive? The answer will not be found in the brochures or the tourism registries. It is being written right now, in the silence of the vacated neighborhoods, the closing of the generational shops, and the quiet departure of the next generation of Romans. The pattern is running its course, and the only question that remains is whether we possess the collective courage to look past the postcard and acknowledge the reality before the fiction can no longer be sustained. Empire Falls documents the shifts that shape our world long before the hit the evening news. If you want to understand the forces pulling the modern world apart, step by step, stay with us. The investigation continues, and the next chapter is already beginning to unfold.